Hello. Today we're going to examine the lore behind Minecraft itself. But more specifically, we're going to look at the possible history of the ancient civilization that left its mark on the world, which gave us, the players, places to explore and loot. Now, anyone who has beaten the Ender Dragon and jumped back into that well portal knows that a very confusing dialogue appears. And in that dialogue, there are two ancient spirits, sometimes by their own admission called gods, who discuss the concept of reality and its purpose. It's a unique combination of both existentialism, the idea that life has no meaning, so you must create meaning for your own life, and the Hinduistic concept of the Atman, the idea that the entire universe is one soul and that everything from a grain of sand to every form of life is just a piece of that soul seeking to experience everything in creation before returning to the original soul, right? And so the goal in that Hinduistic belief is that your Atman will achieve the upper level to go back to the original soul. But those spirits state that them both that the Minecraft world is nothing more than a simulation, something they call the short life, while also saying that everything that happens there is real because it was experienced during the player's long life. Now, that long life is the original soul of the universe. It's that never ending lifespan made up of all the short lives that are experienced. And then the short lives are games, our own reality, books, movies, and things like that. So, in other words, what happens in Minecraft is not real. It's just a simulation or a program, or as they describe it, a dream that you, the player, experience so that you can experience something you wouldn't otherwise. But at the same time, because you did experience it, it is therefore real. Now, I'll be honest, I don't explain the concept very well, so what I'm going to do is put a link in the description of this video to a story simply called The Egg by a guy named Andy Weir. It's about 8 minutes long, it's a little video, it reads the whole story to you, and it summarizes this whole concept of all is one in the form of a story. But either way, the fact that the Minecraft world isn't quote unquote real explains why certain things work in the Minecraft world that wouldn't in our real world, like gravity only affecting some things, or the ability to fly while holding a firework and wearing two pieces of wing-like cloth on our backs. All of that is explained by the fact that Minecraft, while a real experience for your long life, is just a short life dream. Someday I'm going to create a longer video that goes more in depth on that and a few other parts of the mythology of Minecraft itself. But that's not today. However, just because the world is only real to the player, that does not mean that it doesn't have a backstory of its own. And many, many people have tried to piece together that history. Most of the theories are really good and entertaining. Others, well, not so much. But unless Mojang comes out and states what happens on their own, none of the theories are technically wrong, especially since the world itself is nothing more than a creation of the player. Any theory is correct. But like those many people, I have a theory of my own for where the world that Steve and Alex find themselves is set up, or why it's set up the way it is. And I'm kind of hoping that's why you're here to watch this video. So, knowing that it could be absolutely wrong, but at the same time correct because it is a player's theory, here is what I think happened to the Minecraft world before Alex and Steve got there. So 2,000 years before Steve and Alex send themselves to the overworld with nothing but the clothes on their backs, there was a powerful people that lived there. Their society primarily built cities at lower elevations and crafted pottery while they weren't fishing or mining. And they were prolific miners. Even today, the remains of their mine shafts can be found scattered across the world. These people were not merely surviving, though. They built great temples, sailed the vast oceans of the world, and delved extensively into both science and magic as they tried to understand their world. One day, however, the night sky inexplicably lit up as countless objects fell through the atmosphere. Where these objects hit, holes and cracks appeared in the land, deep craters and ravines. The people, shocked at the devastation, went out to find what had fallen. What they brought home, however, confused most of them, because the objects were just green orbs, ender pearls. Already geared towards the study of the universe, the people put their efforts into discovering just what these objects were and where they came from. It was quickly discovered that throwing them would teleport someone to that space, but at the expense of breaking the pearl. Desiring to conquer this new mode of travel, the researchers tasked explorers with scouring the land and bringing back every pearl they could find. At first, the search was slow, but through continued study, the researchers managed to figure out a partial means of teleportation. By entering another dimension, the Nether, people could explore farther, faster. Nether portals were established throughout the world, and many colonists moved into the inhospitable land to set up trading posts, treasure rooms, and stables to ensure that trade would continually flow back and forth between the two dimensions. They built these structures out of the black stone that was readily available within the Nether. It was found that crops were at best difficult to grow in the Nether, and most animals could not survive. Only really pigs and donkeys were able to weather the heat. Those two creatures, meanwhile, found that they could eat the nether wart that grew throughout the dimension. So the animals fed on warped fungus, and the people ate from the pigs almost exclusively. Now, although explorers found countless pearls, the nether portals had an unexpected effect. The heat of the nether continually poured out of the never closing portals, and that heat slowly began to heat up the overworld as well. At first, the change in temperature was barely noticeable, but as time went on, snow began to melt across the overworld, then the glaciers. Before the civilization knew it, the oceans had risen to knee-high in their great cities. The people were forced to move inland to higher elevations. But because the rise in sea level was gradual, they had time to empty out their great temples. Using sponges were necessary to slow the water's rise, which is why Steve and Alex can find nothing except sponges inside of these underwater temples, with the exception of gold and lights. Most of the people settled in valleys along the sides of mountains and hills. New mining expeditions were established. Except for the fact that the people did not rebuild their great temples, life continued as normal. Buildings were made of nearby materials, pottery continued to be crafted, and the people still raised wolves and wheat. The only real difference was that instead of being made of stone, their houses became made of clay, brick, and terracotta, the most available resources. In fear of another flood, the people mined deep into the mountains, eventually discovering the deep, a place where no life could thrive save for a single creature, the Warden. The people respected this beast's nigh invulnerability and respected its desire to stay somewhere quiet and dark. As a side note, I am 90% positive that the Warden was based on the monster Grendel from the epic Beowulf. Like the Warden, Grendel was nearly indestructible, he was hurt by the sounds of joy, and he lived underground. And where the Warden is just annoyed or angered by sound, everything else about him kind of matches this Nordic creature. So I'm kind of thinking the Warden is based on Grendel, but I'll talk about that one also later on in another video. In any case, the Warden was such a unique concept that many of the ancient people drew him on their pottery, which is why you can find sherds with the Warden on them. Now, as more and more pearls were collected, more experiments naturally took place. In time, it was discovered that pouring the powdery remains of a blaze on a pearl changed its properties. Instead of teleporting an individual, it took on the appearance of an eye that, when thrown, would seek out weak points between the dimensions. At these weak points, strongholds were built along with great libraries that were filled with research. In the meantime, fortresses were carved out of the rock in the Nether to gather more blaze powder as the new demand for the powder grew exponentially. As the more modified pearls, or as they came to be called Eyes of Ender, were gathered, the researchers discovered that they could punch holes into yet another dimension. Explorers and colonists flooded into the End, seeking out new knowledge and resources. There they found beautiful floating islands hung in a crystal clear sky. They built great cities on these islands and discovered the means of flight, modeling their flying machines on the ships that sailed the oceans of the overworld. For a time, the ancient civilization found its peak. In all three dimensions, the builders expanded. But as they pushed the boundaries of the End, they found all was not as good as it seemed. Corruption ate at the edges of the floating islands. Now, no one knows if this corruption was always there or if the builders had brought it with them, but the skies began to darken until eventually all light disappeared from the heavens. From out of that darkness, a great flying beast, the dragon, emerged, blowing flame and destroying much of what had been built. In desperation, the builders tinkered in the nether, combining the souls and remains of the dead into a monster to kill the dragon. But their creation, the Wither, turned on its creators. Instead of fighting the dragon, the Wither flew into the overworld, killing and destroying with perverse pleasure. Entire cities fell to the monstrosity, buried in gravel, dirt, and stone. Those who survived did so by fleeing into the mines of the mountains, covering the entrances behind themselves. They knew, of course, the danger of this action, of the life-sucking skulk of the deep, but it was there, deep in the dark, that the ancient civilization built their last cities. They became a quiet people, their language devolving into little more than grunts and hums. Despite the danger of the warden, it was that monster that they put all their hopes on, and so they built monuments to it. Because the Wither was loud, gleefully screaming as it blew things up, and the people knew that if it found them there, it would draw out the warden and the two would fight. No one doubted that the warden would win that fight. Meanwhile, those in the Nether protected themselves from the Wither by destroying every portal they could find, cutting themselves off from the overworld. In the end, those who survived the dragon did so by either hiding or having the right coloring to blend into the background. With their exit to the overworld blocked and the only source of food the teleportation-inducing chorus fruit, the people of the end transformed. Some became attached to their hiding place and became shulkers. Others ate so much of the fruit that they took on its properties, gaining the ability to teleport at will. Those of the Nether fared no better. Cut off from every other dimension, the builders began to change there as well. They became obsessed with trading in gold. Their diet of mutated hoglin meat warped them until they too resembled pigs. The bastions fell into disrepair, the pigmen unable to maintain them properly. The donkeys, the other animal that could survive there, grew whiter on their diet of netherwort. They became as red as the food they ate, and they found a resistance to fire. Over many centuries, they became the striders that travel through the pools of lava that cover the landscape. But worst of all, the corruption of the Wither remained even after it left the dimension, giving rise to the dark skeletons that stalk through the fortresses. In the overworld, the Wither inevitably found the ancient builders in their undermountain homes. Just as the people had predicted, the sound of the monstrosity woke the warden, and the two battled fiercely for many days. In the end, though, the warden won, finally putting an end to the Wither. But this also made the beast aware of the people living their lives in its home. Despite their worship of him, the warden turned on them, killing most and driving the rest back out into the daylight. Out of a mighty civilization that stretched across 3 dimensions, only a fraction of a fraction survived the horrors of the monsters while still retaining their humanity. Those survivors spread out across the overworld. Some settled in new towns, while others banded together into roving gangs of pillagers who took what they wanted rather than grow or create their own supplies. In many of the towns, new temples were built, but no one could quite remember the purpose of them, nor did they have the linguistic skills anymore to explain their drive to build them. Groups who fled to the desert where they hoped the warden's skulk could not follow, built pyramids in a failed attempt to replicate the temples of old. But over time, most of those have fallen into disrepair. Others built more modest temples on the outskirts of their settlements that doubled as watchtowers to warn the townsfolk of danger. Though instead of a lectern to give some sermons to a crowd, the clerics set up potion brewing stands in remembrance of the researchers their people had once been. And many others simply chose to forget to build places of worship, as the need to survive was more important than the need to believe in a higher power that had, it seemed, abandoned them. One thing all the people seemed to agree on, however, without even talking to each other, was to end their days of experimentation, to never build a structure that wasn't absolutely necessary, and to keep settlements small and a long way away from each other. In this way, if another disaster came, there was a greater chance of survival. And so it is that Steve and Alex find themselves in a world that has gone through literal hell and which has never recovered from it. This is why there are still undiscovered ruins to be found. The people have lost their sense of curiosity and fear anything new. They strive for a life of simplicity and peace, not even raising a hand to defend themselves, with the obvious exception of the Illagers. And this is why every time we have discovered all there is to find, like more underground ruins, the upcoming trial chambers, we find more. It's why Mojang is able to continue to update the world, because who knows how much the Wither destroyed when it came? What else is out there to be found? So, thank you for listening to my theory on the history of Minecraft world, the Minecraft world. I kind of hope you enjoyed it as much as I created, and like I said in the beginning, it's absolutely possible it's wrong, but because I am a player, it's automatically right. Bye.